Hey there. Welcome back to Bedtime Story. I know many of you listen to these videos as you fall asleep, so before you settle in, I'd really love to hear where you're tuning in from. And if these stories have been keeping you company at night, leaving a like and subscribing would mean a lot. Now, let's relax, get cozy, take a slow breath, and begin. In this new story, for more than 30 years, scattered sheriff reports, highway patrol logs, and archived newspaper clippings documented a series of nighttime driving incidents across the Appalachian Mountains that investigators never successfully connected. At first glance, every report appeared unrelated. The drivers came from different states, traveled for different reasons, and encountered unusual events on different highways. Yet during a routine archive review in 2019, a transportation analyst noticed one detail appearing again and again. Every driver described reaching a point where the road ahead stopped making sense, even though maps later confirmed they had never left the correct highway. One of the most detailed accounts belonged to 45-year-old Michael Turner, a commercial insurance investigator from Charleston, West Virginia. His work required long hours behind the wheel, inspecting damaged businesses throughout Appalachia. Company records showed he drove nearly 50,000 miles every year without receiving a single traffic citation or accident report. Friends described him as patient, practical, and unusually skeptical of ghost stories or local legends. If anyone claimed something impossible happened along a mountain road, Michael was usually the first person to suggest a reasonable explanation. On an unusually cool evening during early October 2017, Michael completed an inspection near the small community of Harlan, Kentucky. His original plan involved staying overnight before returning home the next morning. Instead, after speaking with his wife by phone, he decided to begin the 4-hour drive home that same evening. Their youngest son had a high school football game the following afternoon, and Michael rarely missed important family events. Shortly after 7:30, he filled his truck with fuel, purchased coffee from a convenience store, and headed north toward a winding mountain highway he had driven many times before. The first 90 minutes felt completely ordinary. Traffic remained light, temperatures continued dropping, and occasional fog drifted across lower valleys without reducing visibility. Michael listened to a local radio station covering college football while passing familiar overlooks, abandoned coal tipples, and small communities resting quietly beneath the surrounding hills. According to cell phone records, he exchanged 2 brief messages with his wife before entering a section of highway where reception regularly disappeared. Nothing suggested the drive would become one of the most unsettling experiences of his life. Around 9 o'clock, Michael noticed something strange enough to remember, but not unusual enough to concern him. Every vehicle traveling in the opposite direction flashed its headlights exactly once before passing. At first, he assumed police officers were monitoring traffic farther ahead. After nearly 20 consecutive vehicles repeated the same action, curiosity slowly replaced that assumption. He reduced his speed slightly and watched carefully for emergency lights, road construction, or wildlife crossing the pavement. None appeared. Eventually, the oncoming traffic disappeared altogether, leaving the highway completely empty beneath the glow of scattered streetlights that ended as abruptly as they had begun. Several miles later, the radio dissolved into heavy static. Michael switched stations without success before connecting his phone through the truck's audio system. Every downloaded song played normally, yet every attempt to stream live radio failed immediately. He checked the dashboard and noticed the outside temperature had dropped nearly 15 degrees within only a few minutes. Thick fog settled across the pavement ahead, though weather forecasts had predicted nothing beyond light patches in lower elevations. Michael slowed again, keeping both hands firmly on the steering wheel as visibility narrowed to little more than 100 feet. Emerging from the fog, he saw an older gas station sitting beside the highway. Its fluorescent lights burned brightly despite appearing decades out of date. 2 vintage fuel pumps stood beneath a weathered metal canopy, while an aging pickup truck rested near the entrance. Michael considered stopping for another coffee simply to stretch his legs. As he turned toward the station, he noticed something that immediately changed his mind. Every window reflected light from inside the building, yet no movement appeared anywhere. The front door stood open, gently swinging back and forth despite the complete absence of wind. He continued driving without slowing further. Approximately 10 minutes later, Michael encountered the same gas station again. At first, he convinced himself another abandoned station simply looked similar. Then he recognized the pickup truck parked beneath the canopy. A faded company logo remained visible across its driver's side door, and one rear taillight had been broken exactly as before. He instinctively looked at the navigation screen, expecting to discover he had somehow driven in a circle. The map insisted he remained on the correct highway, steadily moving north exactly as planned. Mile markers outside confirmed the same direction. There was no interchange, turnaround, or connecting road capable of bringing him back to the previous location. His heartbeat quickened as he passed the station a second time. Once again, the front door remained open. Once again, no people appeared. Michael later admitted that he briefly considered turning around simply to prove the station was different, but common sense argued against stopping alone on an isolated highway after dark. Instead, he continued driving while mentally noting each curve and bridge ahead. Within 15 minutes, he crossed a narrow steel bridge spanning a shallow creek before climbing another ridge. Then, waiting beside the next curve, stood the same gas station for a third time. This time, something had changed. A single figure stood beside the vintage fuel pumps facing the road. The person's features remained impossible to distinguish beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, though Michael clearly remembered one detail. The figure never moved. It simply stood perfectly still, with both arms hanging naturally at its sides as his truck passed. Instinct urged him to keep looking through the side mirror, yet he forced himself to concentrate on the road ahead. When he finally checked the mirror several seconds later, both the station and the figure had disappeared behind dense fog rolling across the highway. Nearly 20 minutes passed before another vehicle appeared. It was a state highway maintenance truck traveling south with amber warning lights flashing above the cab. Relieved to see another driver, Michael pulled onto the shoulder and waved the truck down. According to a statement later obtained by investigators, the maintenance employee immediately asked Michael whether he had become lost. Michael explained everything that had happened during the previous half hour, including seeing the same gas station 3 different times despite remaining on the same highway. The employee listened quietly before asking a question that caught Michael completely off guard. He wanted to know whether the station had been open or closed. Michael answered that the lights were on and the front door stood open every time he passed. The maintenance worker remained silent for several moments before explaining that no gas station had operated anywhere along that stretch of highway since the late 1980s. State transportation records later confirmed his statement. The property had been demolished decades earlier after a highway expansion project rerouted traffic several miles away. Nothing remained except an overgrown concrete foundation hidden beyond the tree line. Curious and increasingly unsettled, Michael followed the maintenance truck to the location identified on official maps. His headlights illuminated only broken pavement, waist-high weeds, and scattered pieces of cracked concrete slowly disappearing beneath years of vegetation. There were no fuel pumps, no canopy, no pickup truck, no building. Convinced fatigue had somehow affected his judgment, Michael completed the drive home and attempted to forget the experience. Weeks later, while organizing paperwork inside his office, he casually mentioned the incident to an older coworker who had grown up nearby. Rather than laughing, the man quietly disappeared into a storage room before returning with a yellowed newspaper clipping preserved inside a plastic folder. The article described 3 separate drivers during 1992 who reported seeing an illuminated service station that no longer existed. One witness even described an older pickup truck parked beneath the canopy with a broken rear taillight. Local deputies searched the highway after every report, but never located the building. Curiosity eventually led Michael to request archived county records through a public information office. Over several weekends, he reviewed accident reports, dispatch logs, and witness interviews stretching back almost 30 years. Although details varied, investigators noticed an unusual pattern. Drivers who reported the mysterious gas station almost always mentioned another small detail beforehand. Some recalled every oncoming vehicle flashing its headlights once. Others remembered sudden radio interference or an unexpected drop in temperature moments before the sighting. None of those details proved anything individually, yet together they appeared often enough to raise questions investigators could never answer. The final report Michael uncovered came from a retired state trooper interviewed shortly before his death. According to archive notes, the trooper admitted responding to similar calls throughout his career. He never claimed the reports involved anything supernatural, but he also acknowledged that experienced drivers consistently described nearly identical events despite never meeting one another. His advice remained surprisingly simple. If a familiar road suddenly feels unfamiliar after dark, keep driving until you reach another town. Do not stop simply because something beside the highway appears to be waiting. Today, thousands of motorists travel safely through the Appalachian Mountains every night without experiencing anything unusual. Modern highways, GPS navigation, and improved communication have made remote travel far easier than it once was. Yet, hidden among county archives, transportation files, and forgotten newspaper collections remain dozens of accounts that investigators never fully explained. They came from different decades, different roads, and different witnesses. Still, many ended with the same unsettling description. Somewhere beyond the next mountain curve, an old gas station, with its lights still burning, appeared where no station had existed for years, leaving behind one of the night drives through Appalachia that people never forgot. For 20 years, nobody entered this Appalachian cabin. Deep in the dense wilderness of the Appalachian Mountains, an abandoned cabin sat completely undisturbed for 2 decades. During the early spring of 2020, a determined property appraiser finally unlocked the heavy front door. What he discovered inside the dusty, rotting structure remains a highly debated topic among regional law enforcement today. Archive notes from the subsequent state police investigation describe a highly disturbing scene that defies simple logical explanation. 45-year-old Robert Hayes worked as a highly experienced municipal property appraiser for the rural county. His primary professional objective required him to evaluate abandoned, secluded estates for upcoming public tax auction property sales. The county file from 2009 mentioned a highly unstable structural foundation regarding this specific isolated property. He safely arrived on April 4th and immediately began carefully assessing the severely overgrown exterior of the structure. The first hour of his standard inspection passed entirely without any significant dangerous incidents or unexpected safety hazards. State records confirm the regional weather forecast predicted clear skies and moderate temperatures for that entire calm afternoon. However, Robert distinctly heard strange, heavy dragging sounds echoing slowly from the upper floor of the abandoned cabin. He initially assumed a large wild animal was aggressively building a nesting den inside the warm, dry attic. When he cautiously shouted a loud verbal warning, the heavy dragging sounds instantly ceased in the dusty darkness. Robert quickly discovered a highly bizarre set of massive, deep indentations on the original hardwood floor completely inside. The strange, unexplainable tracks were perfectly smooth in shape, and they pressed heavily into the solid oak planks. Some locals claimed a rogue drifter occasionally used the abandoned structure to hide stolen heavy commercial mining equipment. Investigators never confirmed those specific, wild, unsubstantiated rumors and firmly maintained the property was completely securely locked prior. Robert carefully photographed the bizarre, smooth floor damage and noted the stride length indicated a massive, heavy object. The highly stressful situation escalated drastically when an awful chemical smell suddenly arrived continuously throughout the entire floor. Reportedly, the foul, suffocating odor tightly resembled burning synthetic plastic, mixed heavily with the sharp scent of sulfur. The dedicated appraiser immediately started coughing violently and aggressively struggling to breathe properly inside the completely sealed room. Robert quickly grabbed his portable emergency radio to call for immediate outside medical assistance, but only received static. Dispatch logs show no emergency distress calls were ever successfully officially recorded by the regional sheriff that day. Suddenly, a massive, unseen, heavy physical force violently shook the solid foundation and partially collapsed the wooden staircase. Robert scrambled frantically toward the dark open hallway and desperately aimed his high-powered flashlight toward the ceiling. The glowing beam instantly revealed an enormous, intense, dark mass standing perfectly still near the broken attic hatch. The strange, dark anomaly lacked any discernible biological features and completely blocked the normal ambient light filtering indoors. Records conflict regarding exactly how long he silently, terrifyingly watched the imposing tall anomaly before it slowly retreated. Afternoon light clearly revealed that his specialized digital measurement equipment was completely shattered into tiny, useless pieces. Robert frantically, urgently decided he absolutely needed to abandon his remaining inspection gear and hike toward his truck. He soon realized his reliable backup analog compass was constantly displaying completely erratic, unexplainable, heavy magnetic directional headings. He was effectively completely disoriented inside a massive, unforgiving wilderness region known for permanently confusing, highly experienced outdoorsmen. The desperate, anxious appraiser decided to blindly, consistently follow the overgrown driveway path, hoping it safely intersected pavement. He hiked for 2 grueling, painful hours through thick, thorny underbrush while constantly feeling intensely, directly, violently watched. Archived notes from Robert stated he repeatedly caught brief, terrifying glimpses of pale, smooth, large objects moving swiftly. Every single time he abruptly stopped to firmly point out the hidden observer, the pale, unknown shapes vanished. Utter physical, mental exhaustion eventually heavily forced him to quickly establish a completely vulnerable, unprotected rest stop briefly. He huddled tightly, safely against a large oak tree while strongly clutching his sturdy walking stick for protection. Around late afternoon, the surrounding dark, dense woods suddenly fell, totally dead silent, as wild birds completely stopped. A deep, guttural, mechanical humming sound slowly, continuously began to violently vibrate through the damp dirt beneath him. Some locals claimed strange underground natural gas releases occasionally plagued the Appalachian region, but geologists officially found nothing. Robert frantically, aggressively scanned the pitch-black, distant tree line with his heavy flashlight, but the battery died. He screamed out loudly in absolute, sheer, unadulterated terror when a tall, pale, smooth shape casually stepped forward. The towering, featureless, pale entity did not overtly, aggressively attack him, but simply stood motionless, completely staring blankly. Robert slowly, hesitantly reached for his heavy orange safety whistle, but his frozen, numb fingers were constantly trembling. The bizarre, towering, unknown creature emitted another deep, deafening, humming vocalization that violently, instantly rattled his internal chest. Plunged into total, suffocating, pitch-black panic, the terrified appraiser blindly, frantically ran into the treacherous, dense woods. He hopelessly, blindly sprinted continuously through the thick, tangled brush until he eventually physically collapsed near the highway. A commercial delivery truck driver miraculously happily found Robert wandering aimlessly near a heavily designated rural gravel shoulder. The older traumatized appraiser was severely badly dehydrated and suffering from multiple minor bleeding lacerations caused by branches. State records confirm he was quickly, safely, immediately transported to a local regional medical hospital and strictly treated. When heavily armed local police deputies eventually carefully navigated back to retrieve the abandoned property, they discovered chaos. The heavy, durable wooden cabin doors were entirely melted into toxic puddles and all metal hinges twisted. The intense subsequent official police investigation failed to produce any logical, rational, scientific answers regarding the strange destruction. Law enforcement officials firmly suspected a highly aggressive local squatter had simply violently rigged the deserted property. However, they absolutely could not logically, realistically explain how the heavy wooden framing was completely melted by temperatures. The overwhelming putrid atmospheric sulfur smell and the highly localized underground ground vibrations also strictly remained completely unsolved. Robert permanently fully abandoned his promising county property appraisal career and rapidly moved to a bustling, noisy city. He completely, absolutely, strictly refused to conduct any further public media interviews regarding his terrifying, unexplainable cabin experiences. He eventually, quietly, safely wrote a highly obscure, completely anonymous internet blog detailing his intense, lingering, severe trauma. Reportedly, he deeply severely suffered from chronic, daily heavy insomnia and constant, terrifying nightmares featuring tall, smooth entities. Dispatch logs regularly show he frequently, frantically called local urban police authorities, continually complaining about heavy vibrations. The actual, true, physical nature of what currently securely resides deep inside that rugged Appalachian cabin remains unspoken. In this new story, people who went into West Virginia's woods and never came back. Many hikers believe that the deep forests of the Appalachian Range are just quiet places for weekend camping trips today. There are stories in the West Virginia mountains about travelers who walked into the trees and simply vanished forever now. This documented account follows a professional geologist who discovered a remote campsite that should not have existed at all. Gideon Vance was a 46-year-old hydrogeologist who specialized in mapping underground springs in very remote areas. He was known for his calm personality and his ability to survive in the wilderness for several weeks alone. In the spring of 2022, Gideon was hired to survey a valley near the edge of the forest. The local residents warned him about a specific ridge where the compass needles often spun in circles without any reason. Gideon did not believe in local superstitions, and he focused on the scientific data provided by his expensive digital tools. He packed his waterproof gear and hiked deep into a canyon where the cell phone signals were completely non-existent. The equipment in his heavy pack included a laser level and a high-precision digital watch that used satellite signals. He carried enough food for 7 days and a small weatherproof logbook to record his various scientific observations daily. The air in the canyon was heavy and smelled of damp moss and the ancient stone of the rising mountain. On the second morning of his trip, Gideon reached a clearing that was not marked on any of his maps. He found a canvas tent that looked like it belonged in the 1950s, sitting near a cold stone fire. There were no modern items like plastic bottles or synthetic fabrics anywhere near the small and very quiet campsite. He called out to see if anyone was nearby, but the only response was the sound of the wind through. Gideon approached the tent and noticed a cast iron skillet sitting on the rocks with fresh bacon grease inside it. He felt a sudden chill even though the sun was shining brightly over the high ridges of the deep valley. Inside the tent, he found a wooden crate containing supplies and a tattered leather journal with yellowed and fragile pages. The handwriting was neat and described a hiking trip taken by two brothers in the summer of 1954. He noticed that the local wildlife seemed unusually quiet, which was a detail he noted in his small weather logbook. The silence of the forest seemed to press against his ears as he turned the brittle pages of the old book. The final entry was dated June 12th and mentioned a strange humming sound coming from the rocks nearby that morning. Gideon looked at the ground and saw a pair of leather boots that looked brand new despite the vintage style. He picked up a newspaper from the crate and saw the headline was from the year 1954 today. He heard a branch snap behind him and turned to see two men wearing heavy flannel shirts and denim pants. The men looked confused and asked Gideon why he was wearing such strange and brightly colored synthetic hiking clothes today. They explained that they had only been camping for 2 days and were waiting for their father to return soon. Gideon realized with a shock that these men matched the descriptions of two brothers who disappeared 70 years ago today. He checked his watch and noticed that the date on his digital screen was now flickering between different years rapidly. The brothers, whose names were Alistair and Emmett, noticed the laser level on his tripod and backed away in terror. Gideon tried to explain that he was a scientist, but his voice sounded like it was coming from far away. He felt a sense of overwhelming vertigo, as if the ground beneath his boots was turning into a gray mist. He ran back toward the main trail and did not look back at the clearing or the two lost brothers. The woods looked different in the fading light, and every tree seemed to shift its position when he turned now. When he reached his truck, he found that the police were already there searching for a missing man named Gideon. The officer named Dalton Grady told him that he had been missing for over 3 weeks in the deep woods. Gideon felt like he had only been away from his vehicle for 2 hours before he reached the main road. He checked his pack and found the leather journal from 1954 sitting right on top of his maps. The final page now had a new entry that described a man in bright orange clothes who visited their camp. Gideon never returned to that part of the West Virginia forest, and he left the geology profession shortly after that. He still dreams about the humming sound in the rocks and the smell of the fresh bacon in the woods. The mountains of West Virginia continue to hold their secrets in the deep places where time does not always move. Some structures are not built of wood and stone, but are woven into the very fabric of the passing years. If you find yourself lost in the woods near the border, you should probably keep moving until the sun comes. The ending of the tale sounds fake until you see the journal and the date written in your own hand. The truth is a shadow that follows you home from the woods and stays with you until the very end. This event remains one of the most puzzling cases in the archives of the local search and rescue teams today. Witness statements from the family members of the missing brothers confirm that the handwriting in the journal is perfectly authentic. The police files include photographs of the campsite that Gideon found, but the clearing was empty when they arrived there. They found no tent and no fire and no signs of the two brothers who had been seen by Gideon. The only evidence left behind was the journal that Gideon had taken from the wooden crate during his initial discovery. Forensic analysis of the paper showed that it was manufactured in the early 1950s, but it showed no aging. The ink was still fresh, and the leather binding had not yet developed the cracks typically found on antique books. Geologists who studied the canyon reported that the rock formations contain unusual magnetic properties that might affect local electronic devices. Some researchers believe that the humming sound Gideon heard was a result of geological pressure deep within the mountain range. Others suggest that the canyon is a place where different eras overlap for a few minutes when the weather changes. Gideon Vance spent several years trying to understand the physics of his experience, but he never found a clear answer. He often visits the county library to look at the missing persons files from the middle of the last century. He found a report about Alistair and Emmett that mentioned they were last seen carrying a heavy canvas camping tent. The photograph in the file showed two young men who were the exact same people Gideon met in the clearing. Their father had also disappeared that same week and was never found by the police or the local search parties. The case remains officially open because the bodies of the brothers were never recovered from the deep and dark woods. Gideon believes that the brothers are still in the canyon waiting for their father to return to their small camp. He often wonders if they saw him as a ghost from the future or a demon from another world entirely. The memory of their confused faces stays with him, and he can still hear their voices in his quiet mind. The forest has grown over the trails that lead to that specific coordinate, and the maps are no longer accurate. The government has restricted access to the valley, citing environmental concerns and the danger of the steep and rocky terrain. Most people who live in the area avoid the mountain and tell their children to stay away from the trees. They know that the woods can take a person and hold them for 70 years without letting them grow old. The silence of the mountain is a warning to those who think they can master the secrets of the wild. If you hear a humming sound in the rocks, you should turn around and run as fast as you Do not look for the clearing and do not speak to the men who are wearing the flannel shirts today. The past is a dangerous place, and it does not always let you return to the present day in one fort. The ending of the story is the part that stays with you when you are walking alone in the night. The mystery is the heart of the wild, and the heart of the wild is a cold and dark. Gideon Thorne is the only witness to a truth that science cannot explain or even begin to understand fully now. The archived dispatch logs from the night of his return record a man who was terrified of his own watch. The officers who processed the report noted that Gideon appeared to have aged several years in just a few weeks. His eyes were bloodshot, and he spoke in a hurried whisper about a camp that did not exist on maps. They took his statement and filed it away with the other unexplained reports from the Appalachian mountain range this year. The journal is kept in a safe at the university where researchers occasionally study the strange and fresh ink. No one has been able to reproduce the magnetic conditions that Gideon described in his detailed and very professional notes. The mountain continues to stand over the valley, and the fog still rolls through the trees in the morning. Some say the brothers are still there, and they are still waiting for the sun to go down today. The story of the surveyor is a warning to those who believe that time is a straight and simple line. It is a loop that can catch you and hold you in a moment that never ends or begins. The woods of West Virginia are deep, and they are very old, and they do not like to be. The ending of the story sounds fake until you stand in the fog and hear the sound of the rocks. The truth is in the journal, and the journal is in the safe, and the safe is in the forest is waiting for the next person to lose their way in the mist of the high ridges. The tale is told, and the listener is warned, and the cabin is waiting in the deep and dark. The story of Gideon Vance is a legacy of the unknown in the heart of the great American wild. The ending is the part that stays with you when you turn off the light at the end day. The mystery is the ending, and the ending is the mystery in the quiet woods of the mountain range. The story is finished, and the forest is dark, and the mountains are silent, and the truth is free. The geologist is home, and the camp is gone, and the brothers are waiting for their father to return soon. The ending is the beginning of the next story, in the heart of the great and ancient mountain wild. The tale of the man who saw the past in the present is done for now in the woods are calling, and the fog is rolling, and the mystery is yours to keep for a long. The ending is the silence that follows the final word of the story of the lost and the truth. The truth is a shadow in the trees, and the trees are the only ones who know the secrets. The story is done, and the fire is out, and the dark is all that remains in the fire. The forensic evidence of the journal remains the only physical proof that the brothers were ever seen after 1954. Handwriting experts compared the new entry to the older pages and found they were written by the same person. This would mean that the boy from the past wrote about Gideon in the future with the same pen today. The local sheriff continues to keep the case on his desk because it is the only one he cannot solve. He looks at the vintage boots in the evidence room and wonders how they could stay so clean and new. The valley is a place where the air stays still and the seasons do not follow the normal calendar cycles. Gideon Vance never went back to the mountains, and he never looked at another digital watch for his entire life. He preferred the steady ticking of an old mechanical clock that stayed in the present moment with him at home. The story of the disappearance is told in hushed tones by the residents of the nearby mountain town of Blackwood. They know that the woods are not just trees and rocks, but are a living part of the local Blackwood. The mystery is a gift for those who listen to the whispers of the wild and the hidden places now. The ending of the tale is the part you will remember when you are walking alone in the forest. The story is a circle, and the circle is a map, and the map leads back to the start. The truth is a fire that burns in the heart of the dark and the silence of the mountain. Strange things happened on our June road trip after midnight. Deep in the remote stretches of the Texas hill country, a routine nocturnal drive became a completely unexplainable, terrifying nightmare. During the incredibly humid summer of 2022, young travelers encountered something that defies basic, logical, scientific explanation. What regional law enforcement eventually uncovered entirely completely destroyed the quiet, peaceful illusion of that specific rural desert community forever. Archive notes from the massive official investigation describe a highly disturbing timeline of events that still haunts state police today. 28-year-old David Miller worked as a dedicated corporate accountant, simply trying to relocate his small family safely. His capable traveling partner was a 26-year-old freelance photographer named Lisa, who actively documented rural historical landscapes. Their primary summer objective required them to drive safely across the desolate Texas wilderness, far away from heavily congested interstates. The county file from 2009 actually mentioned several highly unstable, dangerous sinkholes forming throughout that exact rural region. They arrived on June 14th and immediately began carefully plotting their specific nocturnal driving route near a dark limestone canyon. The first quiet, extremely hot evening passed entirely without any significant dangerous incidents as the exhausted travelers drove steadily onward. State records confirm that severe, scattered desert thunderstorms unexpectedly bypassed their specific elevation despite highly ominous regional weather forecast predictions. However, Lisa woke up shortly after midnight because she clearly heard strange, heavy scraping sounds echoing near the steep, dusty ridge. She initially assumed a curious, heavy desert animal was aggressively investigating their suddenly stalling vehicle near the rocky, jagged roadside. When she cautiously looked directly outside, the heavy metallic scraping sounds instantly ceased in the hot, oppressive summer nocturnal darkness. David quickly discovered a highly bizarre set of massive deep indentations in the dusty soil the following heavily foggy morning. The strange, unexplainable deep tracks were perfectly circular in shape, and they sank nearly 5 inches into the solid dirt. Some locals claimed a rogue commercial mining outfit operated illegally nearby, but investigators never confirmed those specific, wild, unsubstantiated rumors. David carefully photographed the bizarre, dusty, massive footprints and noted that the stride length indicated a massive, heavy industrial machine. He calmly, rationally theorized that some unknown automated logging equipment might have dangerously crossed their remote territory completely unexpectedly overnight. The highly stressful situation escalated drastically during that dark night when an awful chemical smell suddenly arrived continuously inside there. Reportedly, the foul, suffocating odor tightly resembled burning synthetic plastic mixed heavily with the sharp scent of raw industrial sulfur. Both dedicated travelers immediately started coughing violently and aggressively, struggling to breathe properly inside their completely sealed heavy vehicle cabin. Lisa quickly grabbed her portable emergency radio to call for immediate outside medical assistance, but only received loud, aggressive static. Dispatch logs show no emergency distress calls were ever successfully officially recorded by the regional ranger station during that month. Suddenly, a massive, unseen, heavy physical force violently shook the solid asphalt ground and partially cracked their rigid windshield frame. David scrambled frantically out the dark open door and desperately aimed his high-powered thermal imaging camera directly pointing upward. The glowing digital screen instantly revealed an enormous, intense heat signature standing perfectly still behind a large dead oak tree. The strange glowing thermal image lacked any discernible biological features and completely blocked the normal ambient background radiation thermal signatures. Records conflict regarding exactly how long they silently, terrifyingly watched the imposing bright anomaly before it slowly, finally, silently retreated. Morning light quickly, clearly revealed that their specialized digital navigation equipment was completely shattered into tiny, useless, broken, jagged pieces. David frantically, urgently insisted they absolutely needed to abandon their remaining travel gear and hike toward the main rural highway. Lisa completely strongly agreed, but they soon realized their backup analog compasses were constantly displaying completely erratic, unexplainable magnetic headings. They were effectively hopelessly, completely lost in a massive, unforgiving wilderness region known for permanently disorienting, highly experienced, rugged survivalists. The desperate, anxious travelers decided to blindly, consistently follow the slow, dusty trail, hoping it safely intersected a paved road. They hiked for 12 grueling, painful hours through thick, thorny underbrush while constantly feeling intensely, directly, violently watched closely behind. Archived notes from Lisa stated she repeatedly caught brief, terrifying glimpses of pale, smooth, large objects moving swiftly, entirely nearby. Every single time she abruptly stopped to firmly point out the hidden observer, the pale, unknown shapes instantly, completely vanished. Utter physical, mental exhaustion eventually heavily forced them to quickly establish a completely vulnerable, unprotected makeshift camp by the car. They huddled tightly, safely together by a small, warm fire while strongly clutching their sturdy walking sticks for necessary protection. Around 2 in the freezing morning, the surrounding dark, dense desert suddenly fell totally dead silent as wild insects stopped. A deep, guttural, mechanical humming sound slowly, continuously began to violently vibrate through the damp dirt beneath their heavy boots. Some locals claimed strange underground natural gas releases occasionally plagued the Texas region, but geologists officially formally found zero evidence. David frantically aggressively scanned the pitch-black distant tree line with his thermal camera, but the expensive digital battery exploded. Lisa screamed out loudly in absolute sheer unadulterated terror when a tall, pale, smooth shape casually stepped into the firelight. The towering, featureless, pale entity did not overtly aggressively attack them, but simply stood motionless, completely staring blankly directly ahead. David slowly, hesitantly reached for his heavy orange flare gun, but his frozen, numb fingers were constantly heavily trembling violently. The bizarre, towering, unknown creature emitted another deep, deafening humming vocalization that violently, instantly extinguished the warm, bright campfire flames. Plunged into total, suffocating, pitch-black darkness, the two terrified close friends blindly, frantically ran into the treacherous, thorny desert. They hopelessly, blindly sprinted continuously through the dense, tangled brush until they eventually physically separated from each other completely forever. A commercial desert survey operator miraculously, happily found Lisa wandering aimlessly near a heavily designated rural gravel public access channel. The young, traumatized photographer was severely badly dehydrated and suffering from multiple minor bleeding lacerations caused by sharp, jagged cactuses. State records confirm she was quickly, safely, immediately transported to a local regional medical hospital and strictly chemically treated properly. When heavily armed local police deputies eventually carefully, safely navigated back to retrieve the abandoned vehicle, they discovered sheer chaos. The heavy, durable steel car doors were completely, entirely melted into toxic puddles, and all metal engine components were twisted. David was tragically completely never seen again, despite the massive, highly coordinated regional search effort spanning 3 adjacent dry counties. Highly trained tracking search dogs completely entirely lost his distinct individual scent trail near the steep edge of rocky cliffs. Law enforcement officials strongly, firmly suspected the blindly, quickly fleeing accountant accidentally fatally fell into the massive, dark, hidden sinkhole. However, they absolutely could not logically, realistically explain how the heavy vehicle equipment was completely melted by extreme high temperatures. The overwhelming putrid atmospheric sulfur smell and the highly localized underground ground vibrations also strictly remained completely, totally, officially unsolved. Lisa completely, permanently, fully abandoned her promising freelance rural photography career and rapidly moved to a bustling, noisy, crowded city. She completely, absolutely, strictly refused to conduct any further public media interviews regarding her terrifying, unexplainable, deep, dark desert experiences. She eventually, quietly, safely wrote a highly obscure, completely anonymous internet blog detailing her intense, lingering, severe, heavy psychological trauma. Reportedly, she deeply, severely suffered from chronic, daily, heavy insomnia and constant, terrifying nightmares featuring tall, faceless, smooth, looming entities. Dispatch logs regularly show she frequently, frantically called local urban police authorities, continually complaining about strange, heavy mechanical vibrations. The deep, dark Texas hill country deserts remain mostly, completely, thoroughly uncharted and deeply, heavily feared by many veteran guides. Experienced local rural tour operators actively, aggressively, strictly discourage overly ambitious amateur novice tourists from widely exploring that specific area. Official public state records conflict regarding the actual total highly accurate number of missing persons cases strictly linked to wilderness. Some ambitious, independent, amateur internet investigators occasionally dangerously completely venture into the dark region, hoping to finally capture definitive evidence. Most of them always safely return completely empty-handed, while a few others quickly emerge with deeply unsettling, disturbing stories. The absolute, total, complete lack of any definitive hard physical evidence heavily, continually, profoundly frustrates those who genuinely believe Lisa. The destroyed, shattered digital thermal camera conveniently, completely, permanently erased any potential digital visual proof of the giant heat signature. Vociferous internet online skeptics constantly, loudly, aggressively argue that sheer blind panic and total utter darkness easily successfully transformed reality. Archive notes carefully, thoroughly gathered from the official local police investigation confidently, strictly concluded that an undocumented toxic gas leaked. Yet, the exact, highly specific, true physical origin nature of those massive, perfectly smooth circular tracks remains completely officially contested. University biology science experts quickly, easily, permanently dismiss the crazy, ridiculous, bizarre idea of a completely unknown massive desert animal. They firmly, constantly, strongly argue that an active, healthy, massive breeding population of large hidden creatures would leave physical evidence. No unusual animal organic hair samples or strange skeletal biological bone remains have ever been definitively, positively, completely, conclusively linked. Some locals claimed the federal, national, centralized government quietly, aggressively, permanently suppressed the actual truth to secretly protect classified operations. Investigators never confirmed any grand, illegal, hidden conspiracy and simply safely, permanently, officially closed the bizarre, terrifying Texas desert case. The completely destroyed vehicle remains permanently locked securely inside a heavily guarded regional police evidence facility building completely indefinitely today. The thick steel chassis is completely severely warped and violently twisted in ways that heavily confuse professional, licensed structural engineers. They absolutely cannot logically, mathematically explain the immense localized heat signatures required to permanently warp such durable, thick commercial steel. The strange chemical residue carefully extracted from the melted doors completely lacks any known, recognizable, earthly, scientific, periodic table components. Law enforcement officials strongly, silently, actively discourage any independent laboratory scientists from officially testing the highly unusual toxic chemical samples. The specific isolated stretch of rural, unmarked desert highway remains completely officially closed to all civilian commercial traffic passing today. Heavy concrete barricades severely, completely restrict access to the dusty, dark path where the terrified couple originally became lost. Dispatch logs occasionally record highly unusual frantic phone calls from nearby rural ranchers complaining about strange bright nightly skylights. The massive glowing orbs reportedly silently hover directly above the completely restricted desert area before rapidly shooting straight vertically upward. Investigators never confirmed these extremely bizarre, localized aerial phenomena and simply quickly dismissed them as common military night training flares. Lisa constantly refuses to leave her highly secure concrete urban apartment whenever the hot summer season slowly, inevitably descends annually. She strictly, violently demands that every single heavy deadbolt lock remains securely, completely fastened throughout the entire long, dark night. She passionately, completely believes the towering, pale entities are still aggressively, constantly searching for her across the vast, expansive country. Her intense, ongoing, severe psychological therapy sessions carefully attempt to slowly, rationally dismantle her deeply ingrained, absolute paranoid mental delusions, the actual, absolute, terrifying truth hiding deep within that desolate Texas desert wilderness might never be completely, fully mathematically understood. Perhaps some dense, dark, forgotten regions of the deep American wilderness are genuinely safely meant to remain completely, entirely undiscovered. The county file from 2009 explicitly severely warns travelers to completely avoid driving completely alone during dark nights. State records clearly, consistently, actively document a highly disturbing pattern of unexplainable, strange disappearances occurring specifically during extremely hot Junes. The highly dedicated professional regional search teams completely, entirely refuse to officially patrol that specific dark sector after sunset arrives. What people continually reported seeing out there in the massive dark desert still completely, definitively, genuinely makes absolute zero sense. The completely bizarre, tragic Texas desert incident remains a highly popular, terrifying discussion topic on obscure internet online mystery forums. Amateur online sleuths constantly aggressively debate the various conflicting official reports while desperately searching for any hidden, logical, factual clues. Some highly dedicated researchers actively cross-reference these strange coordinate locations with deeply buried historical, indigenous, regional dark folklore stories. They firmly, completely believe the ancient native tribes genuinely knew exactly what terrifying entities lurked inside those specific dark canyons. However, local authorities absolutely strictly prohibit anyone from actively organizing dangerous, large-scale civilian search parties within that restricted region. The quiet, peaceful illusion of a totally harmless, relaxing summer road trip was completely permanently shattered for that young family. Lisa completely isolated herself from all her remaining worried friends and slowly became a highly reclusive, paranoid urban apartment hermit. She constantly, frequently stares blankly out her heavily locked, reinforced apartment window while quietly listening for any heavy mechanical vibrations. Her completely tragic, deeply terrifying story serves as a highly dark, severe warning for any overly adventurous, naive young travelers. The absolute darkest, unseen, deepest corners of the harsh, remote American environment heavily conceal truly dangerous, unexplainable, ancient, predatory anomalies. In this new story, terrifying true encounters from the deep Appalachian Mountains. In 2013, 24-year-old park ranger Elias Thorne was stationed in a remote sector of the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. His primary objective involved surveying trail erosion following a series of heavy storms that had compromised the structural integrity of the local ridgelines. Thorne was an experienced outdoorsman who possessed a deep understanding of the regional topography and the inherent risks associated with isolated mountain navigation. Reportedly, he had completed hundreds of similar solo patrols without incident during his 3-year tenure with the Forestry Department. However, county files from 2013 indicate that his final scheduled check-in never reached the regional dispatch center that evening. The initial search efforts commenced within 6 hours of the missed radio contact as local authorities followed the documented route left in the official logs. State records indicate that search parties found Thorne's abandoned utility vehicle parked at a designated trailhead with his personal gear still inside the cabin. Some investigators noted that the driver's side door remained wide open despite the approaching cold front and the significant drop in ambient temperature. Archived notes from the primary search coordinator describe a scene where there were no signs of a struggle or any forced entry. Dispatch logs from that night confirm that a heavy fog rolled through the valley, which significantly hindered the visibility for the ground teams. By the morning of the second day, a group of local volunteers claimed they discovered a series of unusual depressions in the soft mud. Investigators never confirmed if these markings were of human origin or simply the result of natural erosion occurring near the creek bed. State records show that the tracks led toward a steep limestone cavern system that was not marked on any of the modern geological maps. According to several archived notes from the period, the cave entrance appeared to have been recently disturbed by something of significant physical mass. The team found a single torn piece of a standard forestry uniform snagged on a sharp rock fragment deep within the dark passage. A secondary forensic team arrived on site to examine the evidence, but they found that the subterranean environment was too unstable for a full descent. Records conflict regarding the exact depth of the shaft and whether the sounds reported by the volunteers were echoes or something more tangible. Some locals claimed they heard a rhythmic metallic scraping emanating from the limestone depths during the quiet hours of the early morning search. County files from 2013 reflect that no animal known to the region would produce a sound matching the descriptions provided by those witnesses. The official investigation eventually stalled due to the lack of physical remains and the increasingly hazardous conditions inside the crumbling cavern system. As the weeks passed into 2014, search teams expanded their radius to include the higher elevation ridges located several miles from the vehicle. Records from the county sheriff department indicate that a second-person 29-year-old surveyor named Sarah Miller also went missing nearby. Miller was reportedly working on a private land assessment project when her equipment was found neatly stacked on a granite boulder. State records show that her GPS unit had been placed on top of the stack and was still powered on when found. Investigators never confirmed why she would abandon her high-value tools in the middle of a shift during broad daylight. Archive notes from the Miller case file describe a series of inconsistent witness accounts regarding her movements on the day she vanished. Some locals claimed they saw a figure matching her description walking toward the high peaks without any of her necessary safety gear. Dispatch logs from that afternoon do not record any distress signals or calls for assistance from her assigned mobile radio unit. State records indicate that the search for Miller was eventually merged with the ongoing investigation into the disappearance of Elias Thorne. Authorities noted that both individuals were last seen within a 5-mile radius of the same unmapped limestone cavern system. During the summer of 2014, a team of specialized cave divers attempted to explore the flooded lower chambers of the mountain range. County files from 2014 suggest that the divers discovered a series of narrow tunnels that showed evidence of human occupation. Archive notes describe the presence of several rusted tools and fragments of clothing that appeared to date back several decades. Investigators never confirmed if these items belonged to recent missing persons or to workers from an abandoned mining operation. Records conflict about whether the tunnel system connects to the surface at any point other than the main limestone entrance. One diver reportedly claimed that he saw a series of deliberate markings etched into the stone walls deep beneath the waterline. These markings appeared to be a set of dates and initials, but the silt levels made it impossible to capture clear images. State records show that the diving operation was terminated early after 2 members of the team experienced unexplained equipment malfunctions. Dispatch logs indicate that both divers reported a sudden and total loss of their primary lighting systems simultaneously while in separate chambers. No technical reason for the double failure was ever identified by the equipment manufacturers during the subsequent forensic review. 14 months later, a pair of hikers in a neighboring county located a rusted handheld radio resting on a high rocky ledge. State records verify that the serial number on the device matched the unit issued to Thorne before his disappearance. The ledge was located over 12 miles away from the original search area and required a level of climbing skill Thorne did not possess. Investigators found that the battery had been removed and the internal components were completely corroded by long-term exposure. There was no explanation for how the device reached such a remote and inaccessible location without the use of specialized gear is less than hashone. Zero hash is greater than. Historical data from the county archives mentions a similar series of unexplained disappearances that occurred in the same region in 1976. State records from that era describe a group of 4 experienced backpackers who vanished while navigating the Monongahela forest ridgelines. According to archive notes, the only evidence found was a single tent that had been sliced open from the inside. Investigators never confirmed if the cuts were made by a tool or by the jagged rocks surrounding the campsite. Some locals claimed that the hikers had wandered into an area known for magnetic anomalies that interfere with compass readings. Dispatch logs from 1976 indicate that search teams were forced to retreat due to a sudden and uncharacteristic seismic event. State records show that the ground tremors caused significant shifts in the local cave systems, which altered the landscape permanently. Archive notes from the time suggest that several previously known entrances were swallowed by the shifting limestone plates during the event. Investigators never confirmed if the missing backpackers were trapped in the lower chambers when the geological shift occurred. The files were eventually closed due to a lack of physical evidence or credible leads regarding their final coordinates. In 2015, a local rancher reported finding an old leather satchel partially buried in a dry creek bed near the mountain base. State records indicate that the satchel contained a set of handwritten journals belonging to an unknown individual from 2012. Archive notes from the forensic examination describe the entries as a series of meticulous observations regarding the movement of local wildlife. One specific entry reportedly mentions a large bipedal figure that the author observed watching the camp from the tree line. Investigators never confirmed the identity of the journal author or why the satchel was abandoned in such a precarious spot. The journals also contained a hand-drawn map of the limestone cavern system that featured several exits not found on modern maps. State records show that one of these exits was located near the ledge where Thorne's radio was discovered later. Some investigators questioned if a hidden network of tunnels allowed for rapid movement across the difficult mountain terrain without being detected. Dispatch logs from 2015 indicate that a brief follow-up search was conducted based on the coordinates in the journal. However, the teams found that the specific area mentioned had been covered by a massive rockfall following the 2013 storms. County files from 2016 detail a report of strange light patterns observed by commercial pilots flying over the Monongahela region. State records indicate that the lights appeared as a series of blue pulses originating from the deep mountain valleys. Investigators never confirmed the source of the illumination, although some suggested it was atmospheric phenomena common to high altitudes. Archive notes from the federal aviation logs show that the pulses did not correspond to any known ground-based signals. These reports coincided with another brief spike in local missing person cases that occurred during the same calendar month. The case of Elias Thorne and Sarah Miller remains open in the state records, although no new leads have surfaced recently. Dispatch logs from the original search are still categorized as incomplete because of the numerous reports that were never officially verified. Some locals claimed that the mountain terrain itself changes during heavy fog, making it nearly impossible for even experienced rangers to navigate. Archived notes from the lead investigator suggest that Thorne might have simply succumbed to the elements after becoming disoriented. However, the lack of a body and the strange placement of his equipment continue to fuel a sense of uncertainty. In this new story, the Cumberland wilderness went silent, then we heard it. The dense forests of the Cumberland Gap hold a history of strange occurrences that the local authorities rarely discuss. Gideon Thorne had spent nearly 30 years patrolling the deep woods of the Cumberland wilderness near the quiet Kentucky border. The summer of 1997 was the hottest season on record, and the local wildlife had grown very restless. Gideon was 48 years old, and he oversaw a small team of rangers who focused on the southern ridges. His job required him to manage the safety of hikers who often underestimated the complexity of the ancient limestone caves. He carried a heavy radio and a notebook filled with the coordinates of every hidden spring in his large sector. A wildlife researcher named Beckett Sterling arrived at the ranger station during the first week of August to study birds. Beckett was 32 years old, and he specialized in bioacoustics, which is the study of natural forest sounds. He told the ranger he wanted to record the rare owls that lived in a remote valley called Blackwood Hollow. Gideon checked his permits and reminded the young man that the hollow was known for its unusually thick morning fog. Beckett just smiled, and he adjusted the straps on his large pack before heading toward the dark forest trail ahead. The ranger watched the researcher disappear into the tree line, and he felt a familiar weight of concern in chest. The first 5 days of the expedition passed without any major issues, and the weather remained remarkably clear and sunny. Beckett sent a brief radio check-in every evening at exactly 6 o'clock to confirm his location and safety. On the night of August the 6th, the radio remained silent, and Gideon could not reach the young man back. The ranger waited until the following morning before he organized a small search party to head into the Blackwood Hollow. They started their investigation at the last known coordinates that Beckett had provided during his final successful radio check-in. The searchers found the campsite tucked away in a grove of ancient hemlock trees that were covered in thick moss. The tent was still zipped shut, and all of the expensive recording equipment was sitting on a folding wooden table. Gideon noticed that the entire forest was eerily quiet, and not a single bird was singing in the morning light. There were no signs of a struggle, and the food supplies belonging to Beckett were still sealed in plastic bags. The search party expanded their perimeter, but they could not find any footprints or broken branches in the surrounding area. Gideon found a digital recorder that was still running, and he put on the headphones to listen to the print. The audio file started with the normal sounds of the forest, including the wind in the trees and distant owls. At exactly midnight on the recording, the woods went completely silent, as if someone had turned off a giant switch. The silence lasted for nearly 4 hours, and the only sound was the faint hum of the internal electronic components. Then a rhythmic tapping started to echo through the speakers, and it sounded like a person using a heavy hammer. Beckett could be heard whispering into his microphone about a large shadow that was moving through the trees near camp. He described a figure that was at least 8 feet tall, and it moved without making any sound on leaves. The researcher sounded terrified, and he said the creature was mimicking the sound of his own voice back to him. According to the recording, the being stood just outside the tent, and it repeated the exact words Beckett spoke. The final entry ended with a loud, metallic screech and the sound of something heavy being dragged across the ground. Gideon felt a chill go down his spine as he realized that the researcher was not alone in Hollow. The search party spent the next 3 days scouring every inch of the valley, but they found absolutely nothing new. Gideon decided to review the archived dispatch logs from the early 1970s to see if this happened before then. He discovered that 3 other researchers had vanished in Blackwood Hollow under the exact same circumstances during the summer months. Each case involved a period of total forest silence, followed by reports of strange voices echoing through the limestone caves. Gideon realized that the hollow acted like a natural echo chamber that could capture and repeat sounds for many years. He returned to the campsite one last time, and he began to tap on the nearby rock walls with shovel. He heard a human voice whisper his name from deep within the stones, and it sounded exactly like Beckett Sterling. The ranger followed the sound toward a narrow opening in the cliff face that was hidden behind a thick waterfall. He squeezed through the gap, and he found himself in a large cavern that was filled with old recording gear. The equipment was decades old, and it had been carefully organized by someone who knew exactly how it all worked. Gideon found a final journal entry from a missing ranger who had disappeared in 1974 near the hollow. The writing described a group of beings who lived in the caves and used sound to hunt their human prey. These creatures could perfectly mimic the voices of loved ones to lure people away from their safe and marked trails. Gideon realized that Beckett had been tricked into following a voice that sounded like a friend calling for help. He saw a pile of bones in the corner of the cave that belonged to many different people, and the ranger managed to escape the cavern just as the rhythmic tapping started to echo through the dark stone walls. He ordered the entire Blackwood Hollow to be sealed off from the public, and he declared it a danger. The official report stated that Beckett Sterling had likely fallen into an unmarked sinkhole during a sudden and violent storm. Gideon knew the truth was much more unsettling because the mountain was still holding the voices of the lost hikers. He retired from the service a year later, and he moved to a quiet town where the ground was. The town of Blackwood tried to move on from the disappearance, but the residents never quite felt safe near the people started locking their doors at night, and they told their children to never repeat what they heard in woods. Gideon Thorne spent his remaining years studying the science of acoustics, and he tried to understand the mountain and its. He kept a copy of the final recording, and he often listened to the way the voice shifted and changed. Some people say that the observers are still out there, and they are still waiting for the next curious hiker. The legends of the Cumberland wilderness continue to grow, and more people report hearing voices in the high mountain air. Every August, the rangers notice an increase in the reports of rhythmic tapping coming from the deep limestone caves. They stay on the lower trails, and they never go into the hollow after the sun has set at. The case remains open in the dusty files of the sheriff's office, but no new evidence has been found. The forest remains thick, and the secrets of the Cumberland Gap are buried deep within the cold gray stone. Gideon often wondered if Beckett was still in the cave, and if he was still calling out for someone. He knew that some mysteries are better left alone in the dark corners of the world, where the wind. The investigation into the recording gear revealed that the machines had been modified with parts that were not commercially available. This discovery suggested that the beings in the caves possessed a high level of technical knowledge about sound and physics. Gideon realized that the creatures were not just animals, but were a highly evolved species that lived in the dark. He spent his final days writing a book about the experience, but he never shared the most terrifying details with. He died in 2024, and he left his collection of audio tapes to the local Historical Society archives. The researchers who studied the tapes found that the voices in the background were actually speaking a very old language. It appeared that the beings had been living in the Cumberland Gap for thousands of years before the settlers arrived. This realization changed the way the community viewed the mountains and the legends that had been told for generations. The mystery of the Cumberland silence remains unsolved, and the files are still locked in the ranger station basement. The town of Blackwood remains a quiet place, but the residents always listen closely when the woods go silent suddenly. They know that the mountain has a memory, and it never forgets a sound that it has heard before. Silas Thorne occasionally visits the old trailhead, and he leaves a small offering of electronics or metal on the rocks. He says it is a way to acknowledge the power of the mountain and its silent and ancient watchers. Some people laugh at him, but others bring their own gifts to the edge of the dark and thick forest. The hollow seems to accept these items, and the number of disappearances has decreased significantly over the last few years. Beckett Sterling is remembered as a brilliant researcher who pushed the boundaries of what we know about the natural. His family still visits the park every year, but they never go near the valley where he was lost. They stand on the high ridges, and they listen to the wind blowing through the trees of the Cumberland. Sometimes they hear a faint voice on the breeze, but they know better than to follow the sound into. The Appalachian Mountains continue to stand tall, and they keep their secrets hidden beneath the canopy of the green trees. The story of the silent wilderness is a reminder that we are only temporary guests in an ancient world. Gideon Thorne once wrote that the woods do not belong to us, but to the sounds that live within. Every October, the people look at the mountains and they remember the night the Cumberland wilderness went completely and eerily. The final recording Gideon made before he left the service was a simple description of the silence in the forest. He said that the silence was not an absence of sound, but a presence that felt very heavy and dark. He believed that the mountain was a living record of every scream and every laugh that had ever happened. This theory was never proven, but it remains a popular topic among the local hunters and the forest rangers. The tapes from the hollow are now stored in a specialized vault to prevent any unauthorized people from listening. Many people have tried to find the entrance to the hidden cavern, but the cliffs have shifted over the years. It seems as though the mountain has moved the path to protect its secret from the people who live. Silas Thorne says that some things are not meant to be mapped or understood by those who do not belong. He still patrols the lower trails, but he never goes above the ridgeline after the sun has set. He knows that the observers are still there, and they are still waiting for the next voice too. The legend of the Cumberland Silence is a chilling reminder of the power of the strange and the dark. The mountain remains a silent witness to the history of the land and the people who have passed through. Every year, the fog rolls into the hollow, and the woods go quiet once again for a long time. In this new story, most visitors entered Appalachia expecting breathtaking overlooks, quiet rivers, and endless forests painted with brilliant autumn colors. They planned scenic drives through mountain passes where every curve revealed another postcard view. Few realized those same roads carried generations of stories that never appeared in travel brochures. Long before highways connected distant towns, narrow mountain routes linked isolated communities that depended entirely on one another. Families remembered every bridge, every abandoned church, and every forgotten cemetery hidden among the ridges. Some roads eventually gained quiet reputations that locals rarely discussed with strangers. The warnings usually arrived as simple advice rather than dramatic ghost stories. Older residents suggested reaching the next town before sunset or choosing the longer highway instead of certain backroads. They almost never explained why. For most travelers, those conversations sounded like ordinary mountain folklore. Only years later did some realize they had unknowingly driven through places where unexplained experiences had been reported for generations. One autumn evening, the Harris family began what they believed would become another unforgettable drive through the Appalachian Mountains. Mark Harris enjoyed photographing abandoned structures, while his wife Jennifer preferred documenting forgotten churches, one-room schoolhouses, and historic cemeteries scattered throughout rural valleys. Their teenage son Ethan spent most trips recording video for a travel channel dedicated to overlooked destinations across America. They had already crossed thousands of miles without experiencing anything stranger than unexpected wildlife crossing the road. Careful planning, reliable equipment, and years of experience convinced them they understood mountain travel better than most tourists. Nothing suggested this journey would become the only trip they refused to repeat. Their route followed a collection of state highways winding through remote sections of eastern Appalachia, where towns sometimes stood nearly 40 miles apart. Cellular reception faded shortly after leaving the interstate. Paper maps replaced navigation apps because the surrounding mountains frequently interrupted satellite signals. The family welcomed the isolation. Modern distractions disappeared almost immediately, leaving only forests stretching endlessly beyond both sides of the pavement. Occasional wooden signs pointed toward communities with populations smaller than a single city block elsewhere in the country. Weather remained perfect throughout the afternoon. Blue skies reflected across narrow rivers flowing beside the highway, while cool mountain air drifted through open windows, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. Shortly before sunset, they stopped at a family-owned diner overlooking a small valley. Local residents filled nearly every table despite the quiet weekday evening. Conversations centered around hunting season, changing weather, and roads damaged during previous winters. When Mark casually mentioned their planned route across an older mountain highway, several conversations briefly stopped before continuing as though nothing had happened. Their waitress hesitated only long enough to ask whether they intended driving that road after dark. Mark answered yes, because the next motel remained less than 90 miles away. She nodded politely before recommending they leave immediately rather than waiting for dessert. Her tone carried concern instead of fear, making the advice strangely memorable. The highway narrowed within minutes after leaving town. Fresh pavement gradually gave way to older asphalt, patched repeatedly over decades. Guardrails disappeared along several steep curves overlooking valleys that vanished beneath growing darkness. Dense hardwood forests pressed tightly against both sides of the road until branches formed a tunnel overhead. Traffic became almost non-existent. During nearly 40 minutes, they encountered only one pickup truck traveling in the opposite direction. Its driver briefly flashed headlights twice before disappearing around the next bend. Jennifer assumed the signal warned about deer farther ahead. Ethan continued filming through the windshield, hoping to capture the fading evening light filtering between towering ridges. Darkness arrived much faster than expected beneath the forest canopy. Mark switched to high beams, revealing countless tree trunks standing like silent walls only a few feet beyond the pavement. Fog slowly gathered inside low valleys before drifting upward across the highway. Visibility remained acceptable, yet every curve looked strangely similar to the previous one. Ethan eventually lowered his camera after noticing something unusual. Mile markers seemed inconsistent. Marker 63 appeared first, followed several minutes later by marker 61. Another curve revealed marker 64 again. Mark assumed he had simply misread them while concentrating on the winding road. Ethan replayed his recording and quietly confirmed the numbers appeared exactly as remembered. Jennifer unfolded their paper map beneath the interior light. According to the route, they should have reached a small crossroads community nearly 15 minutes earlier. Instead, the forest continued uninterrupted in every direction. No driveways appeared, no mailboxes stood beside the pavement, even electrical lines seemed to vanish beyond the last ridge they crossed. The silence outside gradually became noticeable. Normally, mountain roads echoed with insects, distant streams, or occasional owls. Here, the surrounding forest appeared completely still, despite gentle wind moving across the higher slopes. When Mark lowered his window for several seconds, he heard nothing except the steady hum of the engine. Another 20 minutes passed before headlights illuminated an old white church standing beside the road. A narrow cemetery surrounded the building behind a weathered iron fence, leaning noticeably toward the hillside. Jennifer asked whether they could stop for photographs the following morning because moonlight gave the place an unusual appearance. Mark slowed slightly but continued driving. Less than 10 minutes later, Ethan looked up from his camera and quietly asked why they were passing the same church again. Nobody answered immediately. The identical leaning fence, cracked front steps, and broken stained glass window stood exactly where they had appeared before. Mark insisted another church probably resembled the first one because many rural congregations used nearly identical architecture. Ethan remained unconvinced after comparing both video clips side by side. The family finally reached a narrow bridge crossing a shallow creek. Beside the entrance stood an old wooden warning sign faded almost beyond recognition. Jennifer noticed a distinctive lightning-shaped crack running through one corner of the board. 15 minutes later, another bridge appeared. The same crack marked another weathered sign, standing in exactly the same position. Ethan searched his earlier footage again before quietly showing the screen to his parents. Every knot in the wood matched perfectly. Even missing paint formed identical patterns. Mark felt the first genuine wave of uncertainty since entering the mountains. He checked the odometer. According to the vehicle, they had traveled nearly 60 additional miles, yet every landmark suggested otherwise. Concern slowly replaced curiosity. Mark attempted turning onto the first side road they encountered, hoping it would reconnect with another highway. Less than 5 minutes later, the narrow lane curved unexpectedly before returning to the same main road from the opposite direction. The old bridge stood ahead once again. Jennifer suggested consulting a compass stored inside the glove compartment. The needle refused to settle in one direction, drifting slowly before stopping, then turning again without obvious reason. Ethan tried restarting his phone, even though no signal remained available. The digital map loaded briefly before displaying their location several counties away, then disappeared completely. None of the devices agreed with one another. Shortly after midnight, another vehicle finally appeared behind them. Relief spread through the family until Jennifer noticed something unsettling. The headlights never seemed to grow closer, despite following for nearly 15 minutes. They remained the same distance back through every curve, occasionally disappearing behind hills before returning exactly where they had been before. Mark reduced speed, hoping the driver would pass. The lights slowed as well. He accelerated slightly. They matched his pace again without gaining or falling farther behind. Ethan filmed through the rear window until the headlights vanished completely while rounding one sharp bend. The road behind them remained empty for miles afterward. Nearly an hour later, they reached a small gas station illuminated by a single fluorescent light. Relief quickly turned into confusion after discovering the pumps covered with rust and weeds growing through cracked concrete. Dust coated every window. The building had obviously been abandoned for years. Jennifer later recalled feeling certain she had seen the lights glowing from nearly a mile away, yet no electrical service appeared connected anywhere on the property. Ethan photographed the station before they continued driving. The digital timestamps on every image later showed conflicting times despite being taken only seconds apart. Some indicated photographs captured before they entered the highway, while others appeared almost 2 hours into the future. No explanation ever accounted for the corrupted sequence. The highway finally emerged from the mountains shortly before dawn. A larger state road appeared ahead, along with the first passing traffic they had seen in hours. They stopped at a convenience store where the cashier immediately asked whether they had spent the night on the old mountain route. Without describing their experience, Mark simply nodded. The cashier quietly explained that travelers occasionally arrived exhausted after believing they had driven in circles despite following the same highway. Most blamed heavy fog, unfamiliar terrain, or fatigue. Others refused, discussing the experience altogether. Local law enforcement had investigated numerous reports over the years, yet found no damaged signs, missing intersections, or roadway defects capable of explaining why unrelated visitors described remarkably similar experiences separated by decades. Back home, the Harris family reviewed every photograph, map, and video collected during the trip. Mileage records, timestamps, and recorded landmarks refused to fit into any logical sequence. Nothing proved anything supernatural had occurred. Mountain roads, exhaustion, changing weather, and human perception could easily combine in unexpected ways. Researchers studying navigation errors have long documented how isolated environments distort distance, direction, and memory, especially after dark. Even so, one detail remained impossible for the family to ignore. Ethan's continuous dashboard recording showed the same weathered church appearing twice without any visible turnaround, intersection, or break in the journey. Every attempt to retrace the route months later failed because neither the church nor the abandoned gas station could be located where maps indicated they should have been. Today, the family still visits Appalachia, but they never travel unfamiliar mountain roads after sunset. Whenever someone asks why, they simply recommend reaching the next town before dark, repeating the same quiet advice once offered to them without explanation. In this new story, the Carter family had lived in the same narrow Appalachian hollow for nearly 12 years before anything unusual ever happened. Their weathered farmhouse rested between steep forested ridges where sunlight disappeared long before evening reached nearby towns. Only 4 other homes stood within several miles, separated by winding gravel roads and dense hardwood forests that seemed to swallow every sound after sunset. The isolation had always been part of the appeal because the family preferred quiet lives away from crowded highways and expanding suburbs. Neighbors often described the hollow as peaceful, despite its reputation among older residents who quietly admitted they avoided walking those woods after dark. Spring arrived later than expected during that particular year. Cold mornings lingered well into April, leaving thick patches of fog trapped along the valley floor until midday. The Carter family continued their daily routines without noticing anything out of place. David worked maintenance at a nearby lumber mill, while his wife Karen managed the property and homeschooled their youngest daughter. Their older son often hunted turkey before sunrise, returning with stories about deer trails, black bears, and distant owls. Nothing in those conversations hinted that the family would soon become the subject of whispered discussions throughout neighboring communities. The first strange incident appeared so ordinary that nobody thought it deserved much attention. Shortly after midnight, one calm Tuesday, Karen woke because someone seemed to be slowly walking across the gravel driveway outside their bedroom window. The footsteps remained steady without rushing or hesitating. She assumed a neighbor needed help with a broken truck because emergencies sometimes happened in remote mountain communities. David pulled aside the curtain, expecting headlights or flashlights. Instead, he found only darkness stretching across the yard beneath a cloud-covered sky. The footsteps stopped the moment he looked outside, leaving complete silence behind. The following evening, everything remained perfectly normal until almost the exact same time. Again, the slow footsteps crossed the driveway. Again, they sounded close enough to identify individual stones shifting beneath heavy boots. David immediately stepped onto the porch carrying a flashlight. The beam reached the tree line without revealing anyone. Fresh dew covered the gravel, yet no footprints appeared anywhere across the driveway. The woods surrounding the farmhouse remained unusually still. Even insects seemed quieter than expected for that season, something David mentioned only after returning indoors. By the end of the week, every member of the family except the youngest daughter had heard the footsteps. Each person described the same deliberate pace. Nobody reported running, stumbling, or changing direction. Whatever produced the sound seemed to walk directly toward the front porch before stopping several feet short of the steps. Then, absolute silence followed. The family waited behind darkened windows several nights, hoping to catch whoever might be playing an elaborate prank. No figure ever appeared despite the unmistakable sound approaching the house with remarkable consistency. Weeks passed before another detail entered the story. Their closest neighbor, who lived almost 2 miles away, casually mentioned hearing someone walking outside his barn after midnight. He assumed raccoons had climbed across stored equipment until he noticed the sounds resembled measured human footsteps rather than animal movement. When David described similar experiences, the neighbor grew noticeably uncomfortable. He admitted older relatives once warned him never to investigate unexplained footsteps echoing through mountain hollows during unusually quiet nights. Those warnings came without explanations because previous generations rarely discussed such experiences openly. David dismissed the conversation as local folklore, even though the timing unsettled him. Rural Appalachian communities preserved countless stories passed through families for generations. Most involved cautionary tales meant to keep children away from abandoned mines, unstable cliffs, or unfamiliar strangers. He believed these newer rumors probably served the same purpose. Nevertheless, he installed brighter floodlights around the farmhouse and checked every window before sleeping. The lights illuminated nearly every corner of the property, making it difficult for anyone to approach unnoticed. Despite those changes, the footsteps continued exactly as before. Summer brought warmer temperatures and longer evenings. Friends visited for weekend cookouts, often staying well past sunset. Nothing unusual happened whenever guests remained outside. The strange sounds appeared only after everyone else had left and the family settled into bed. One visitor later remarked that the property felt unusually peaceful compared with neighboring valleys because almost no highway noise reached the hollow. Karen privately wondered whether that silence simply made ordinary nighttime sounds seem more disturbing. She tried convincing herself the explanation was psychological, yet every repeated incident chipped away at that confidence. One humid July night, the pattern unexpectedly changed. Instead of stopping near the porch, the footsteps slowly circled the entire farmhouse. Each family member listened while the unseen walker completed what sounded like a careful inspection around every exterior wall. Wooden boards occasionally creaked beneath invisible weight. Gravel shifted beside basement windows. Dry leaves rustled near the back entrance. David opened the rear door before the sounds reached that side of the house. Nothing stood beneath the floodlights except motionless trees swaying gently in the warm night air. Karen began recording dates and times inside a notebook. She hoped documenting each occurrence might reveal a logical pattern connected to weather, wildlife, or nearby activity. After several months, she noticed most incidents happened during calm evenings without strong wind or rain. The sounds almost never appeared during storms. They also seemed concentrated between midnight and 2 in the morning. Those observations fascinated David because they suggested consistency rather than random imagination. Still, neither explanation nor physical evidence emerged despite careful attention. The new house seemed perfect until we heard someone upstairs. Deep within the historic suburban neighborhoods of Savannah, a young married couple purchased their beautiful colonial dream home. During the humid autumn of 2020, they completely renovated the massive historic wooden structure very carefully. What actually happened during their very first night indoors completely defies any basic, logical, modern scientific explanation today. Archived notes from the subsequent state police investigation describe a highly disturbing timeline of terrifying late-night events. 32-year-old Liam worked as a highly dedicated structural architect designing complex commercial office buildings daily. His highly capable wife was a 30-year-old financial accountant named Chloe, who frequently worked remotely indoors. Their primary professional goal required them to quickly establish a quiet, comfortable domestic life away from noisy apartments. The county file from 2009 actually mentioned several highly unusual trespassing complaints regarding this exact property. They officially arrived on October 12th and immediately began carefully unpacking their heavy cardboard boxes in the parlor. The first quiet afternoon passed entirely without any significant dangerous incidents as the exhausted couple arranged their furniture. State records confirm the regional weather forecast predicted clear skies and dropping temperatures for that entire dark night. However, Chloe woke up shortly after midnight because she clearly heard strange, heavy footsteps echoing above their ceiling. She initially assumed a large, heavy animal was aggressively exploring the completely unfinished, dusty, wooden, dark, hidden attic. When she cautiously listened closer, the heavy, rhythmic footsteps instantly ceased completely in the cold, oppressive, silent house. Liam quickly discovered a highly bizarre, locked, heavy wooden door blocking the narrow hallway leading toward the stairs. The strange, unexplainable, heavy door was perfectly solid, and it featured 3 massive modern steel deadbolts installed backwards. Some locals claimed a rogue, eccentric previous owner actively hid dangerous structural damage behind heavily reinforced wooden barricades. Investigators never confirmed those specific wild, unsubstantiated rumors and strictly maintained the property was entirely structurally safe generally. Liam carefully photographed the bizarre locked barricade and noted that the surrounding drywall showed extreme signs of stress. The highly stressful situation escalated drastically during that dark hour when an awful chemical smell suddenly arrived continuously. Reportedly, the foul, suffocating odor tightly resembled burning synthetic plastic mixed heavily with the sharp scent of sulfur. Both dedicated homeowners immediately started coughing violently and aggressively struggling to breathe properly inside their completely sealed bedroom. Liam quickly grabbed his portable emergency radio to call for immediate outside medical assistance, but only received static. Dispatch logs show no emergency distress calls were ever successfully officially recorded by the regional police department then. Suddenly, a massive, unseen, heavy physical force violently shook the solid foundation and violently rattled the thick windows. Liam scrambled frantically toward the dark hallway and desperately aimed his high-powered security flashlight toward the ceiling. The glowing beam instantly revealed an enormous, intense, dark mass standing perfectly still directly behind the stair banister. The strange, dark anomaly lacked any discernible biological features and completely blocked the normal, bright ambient light entirely. Records conflict regarding exactly how long they silently, terrifyingly watched the imposing tall anomaly before it slowly retreated. Chloe frantically, urgently insisted they absolutely needed to completely abandon their newly purchased historic home and run outside. Liam completely strongly agreed, but they soon realized the main electrical breaker panel was constantly displaying erratic sparks. They were effectively hopelessly trapped inside a massive, unforgiving structural maze known for permanently confusing, highly experienced contractors. The desperate, anxious architect decided to blindly, violently run toward the front door, hoping to retrieve his keys. He confidently, blindly sprinted continuously through the freezing dark living room until he eventually physically discovered the entrance. Liam remained entirely, completely, silently hidden behind the thick, solid wooden couch while intensely listening for aggressive movements. Archived notes from Liam stated he repeatedly caught brief, terrifying glimpses of pale, smooth, large objects moving swiftly. Every single time he abruptly, cautiously raised his head to firmly point out the hidden observer, they vanished. Utter physical, mental exhaustion eventually heavily forced him to quickly, carefully establish a completely vulnerable, unprotected defensive position. He huddled tightly, safely, against the heavy metal radiator while strongly clutching a heavy steel flashlight for protection. Around 2 in the freezing morning, the surrounding dark, dense house suddenly fell totally dead silent entirely, completely. A deep, guttural, mechanical humming sound slowly, continuously began to violently vibrate through the damp dirt beneath floorboards. Some locals claimed strange underground natural gas releases occasionally plagued the Savannah region, but geologists officially found nothing. Liam frantically, aggressively scanned the pitch-black distant hallway with his heavy flashlight, but the expensive battery died. He silently screamed internally in absolute, sheer, unadulterated terror when a tall, pale, smooth shape casually stepped forward. The towering, featureless, pale entity did not overtly, aggressively attack the reinforced door, but simply stood motionless completely. Liam slowly, hesitantly gripped his heavy steel flashlight tightly, but his frozen, numb fingers were constantly heavily trembling. The bizarre, towering, unknown creature emitted another deep, deafening, humming vocalization that violently, instantly, completely shattered the windows. Plunged into total, suffocating, pitch-black darkness inside the house, the terrified young couple blindly, frantically crawled desperately. They hopelessly, blindly waited continuously inside the highly secure, locked basement room until the early morning sunlight arrived. A commercial utility repair operator miraculously happily found the rural property completely devastated near the heavily designated street. The highly traumatized young couple was severely, badly dehydrated and suffering from multiple minor bleeding lacerations from glass. State records confirm they were quickly, safely, immediately transported to a local regional medical hospital and strictly treated. When heavily armed local police deputies eventually carefully, safely navigated back to retrieve the abandoned property, they discovered chaos. The heavy, durable wooden interior doors were completely, entirely melted into toxic puddles and all metal hinges twisted. Liam was tragically completely unable to mentally process his terrifying experience despite the massive, highly coordinated psychological support. Highly trained tracking search dogs completely, entirely lost any distinct individual scent trails near the steep property edge. Law enforcement officials strongly, firmly suspected the blindly, quickly fleeing couple accidentally entirely hallucinated the terrifying, massive entity. However, they absolutely could not logically, realistically explain how the heavy steel locks were completely melted by temperatures. The overwhelming putrid atmospheric sulfur smell and the highly localized underground ground vibrations also strictly remained completely unsolved. Chloe completely, permanently, fully abandoned her promising financial accounting career and rapidly moved to a highly bustling city. She completely, absolutely, strictly refused to conduct any further public media interviews regarding her terrifying, unexplainable house experiences. She eventually, quietly, safely, wrote a highly obscure, completely anonymous internet blog detailing her intense, lingering, severe trauma. Reportedly, she deeply, severely suffered from chronic, daily, heavy insomnia and constant, terrifying nightmares featuring tall, smooth entities. Dispatch logs routinely, regularly show she frequently, frantically called local urban police authorities, continually complaining about heavy vibrations. The deep, dark, isolated suburban Savannah house remains mostly completely, thoroughly abandoned and deeply, heavily feared by residents. Experienced local rural real estate agents actively, aggressively, strictly discourage overly ambitious amateur novice buyers from exploring acreage. Official public state records conflict regarding the actual, total, highly accurate number of missing trespasser cases strictly linked. Some ambitious, independent amateur internet investigators occasionally, dangerously, completely venture into the dark, unmarked house hoping for evidence. Most of them always safely return completely empty-handed, while a few others quickly emerge with unsettling stories. The absolute, total, complete lack of any definitive, hard physical evidence heavily, continually, profoundly frustrates those who believe. The completely destroyed internal security cameras conveniently, completely, permanently erased any potential digital visual proof of the entity. Vociferous internet online skeptics constantly, loudly, aggressively argue that sheer blind panic and total utter darkness easily transformed. Archived notes, carefully, thoroughly gathered from the official local police investigation, confidently, strictly concluded that an undocumented leak, yet the exact, highly specific, true physical origin nature of those massive, perfectly smooth, melted door frames remains. University, biology, science experts quickly, easily, permanently dismiss the crazy, ridiculous, bizarre idea of a completely unknown anomaly. They firmly, constantly, strongly argue that an active, healthy, massive biological population of large hidden creatures leaves evidence. No unusual biological organic hair samples or strange skeletal biological bone remains have ever been definitively positively linked. Some locals claimed the federal, national, centralized government quietly, aggressively, permanently suppressed the actual truth to protect operations. Investigators never confirmed any grand, illegal, hidden conspiracy and simply safely, permanently, officially closed the bizarre, terrifying case. The strange things that happened during those June nights. Deep within the heavy, humid swamps of southern Louisiana, an isolated botanical expedition encountered something entirely unexplained. During the sweltering hot summer of 2017, two highly dedicated researchers established a remote camp. What they recorded over 3 continuous, terrifying nights remains a highly contested mystery among local authorities today. Archived notes from their official state investigation reveal a disturbing timeline that defies simple, logical, scientific explanation. Mark was a 32-year-old professional field botanist tasked with documenting rare endangered swamp orchids. His capable working partner was a 29-year-old highly experienced wildlife photographer named Lisa. Their primary scientific objective required them to camp deep inside the remote bayou away from established trails. The official county file from 2009 mentioned highly unusual animal migration patterns throughout that region. They safely arrived on June 12th and immediately began setting up their heavy equipment near dark water. The first quiet night passed without any significant dangerous incidents as the thoroughly exhausted researchers slept soundly. State records confirm that severe scattered thunderstorms unexpectedly bypassed their specific location despite highly ominous weather predictions. However, Lisa woke up shortly after midnight because she heard strange, heavy splashing sounds near the bank. She initially assumed a curious large alligator was investigating their sealed waterproof containers near the muddy shore. When she cautiously shined her heavy flashlight outside, the heavy splashing sounds instantly ceased in the darkness. Mark quickly discovered a series of massive, deep indentations in the damp soil the following humid morning. The strange, deep tracks were vaguely humanoid in shape, but they sank nearly 4 inches into mud. Some locals claimed a rogue commercial trapping outfit operated illegally nearby, but investigators never confirmed those rumors. Mark carefully photographed the bizarre muddy footprints and noted that the stride length indicated a tall creature. He calmly rationalized that rapidly rising swamp water might have dangerously distorted ordinary wild animal tracks overnight. The highly stressful situation escalated drastically during their second dark night when an awful chemical smell arrived. Reportedly, the foul, suffocating odor resembled rotting meat mixed heavily with the sharp scent of raw sulfur. Both dedicated researchers immediately woke up, coughing violently and struggling to breathe properly inside their small tents. Lisa quickly grabbed her emergency satellite radio to call for immediate outside assistance, but only received static. Dispatch logs show no emergency distress calls were ever successfully recorded by the regional ranger station then. Suddenly, a massive, unseen heavy force violently shook the solid ground and collapsed the aluminum tent frame. Mark scrambled frantically into the dark open clearing and desperately aimed his high-powered thermal imaging camera. The glowing digital screen instantly revealed an enormous, intense heat signature standing perfectly still behind a cypress. The strange, glowing thermal image lacked any discernible biological features and completely blocked the ambient background radiation. Records conflict regarding exactly how long they silently watched the imposing bright anomaly before it slowly retreated. Morning light quickly revealed that their specialized digital navigation equipment was completely shattered into tiny, useless pieces. Mark frantically insisted they absolutely needed to abandon their remaining camping gear and hike toward the highway. Lisa completely agreed, but they soon realized their backup analog compasses were displaying erratic magnetic directional headings. They were effectively hopelessly lost in a massive, unforgiving wilderness region known for disorienting, highly experienced survivalists. The desperate, anxious botanists decided to blindly follow the slow river current, hoping it intersected a road. They hiked for 12 grueling, painful hours through thick, thorny underbrush while constantly feeling intensely directly watched. Archived notes from Lisa stated she repeatedly caught brief, terrifying glimpses of pale, smooth objects moving swiftly. Every single time she abruptly stopped to point out the hidden observer, the pale, unknown shapes vanished. Utter physical exhaustion eventually forced them to establish a completely vulnerable, unprotected makeshift camp by the water. They huddled tightly together by a small, warm fire while clutching their sturdy walking sticks for protection. Around 2 in the morning, the surrounding dark, dense woods suddenly fell dead silent as insects stopped. A deep, guttural, mechanical humming sound slowly began to vibrate through the damp dirt beneath their boots. Some locals claimed strange underground natural gas releases occasionally plagued the region, but geologists found no evidence. Mark frantically scanned the pitch-black distant tree line with his thermal camera, but the battery exploded. Lisa screamed loudly in absolute terror when a tall, pale, smooth shape casually stepped into the firelight. The towering, featureless, pale entity did not aggressively attack them, but simply stood motionless, staring blankly ahead. Mark slowly reached for his heavy orange flare gun, but his frozen, numb fingers were trembling violently. The bizarre, towering, unknown creature emitted another deep, deafening, humming vocalization that violently extinguished the campfire flames. Plunged into total suffocating pitch darkness, the two terrified close friends blindly ran into the treacherous swamp. They hopelessly sprinted blindly through the dense, tangled brush until they eventually separated from each other forever. A commercial swamp airboat tour operator miraculously found Lisa wandering aimlessly near a designated access channel. The young, traumatized photographer was severely dehydrated and suffering from multiple minor lacerations caused by sharp branches. State records confirm she was immediately transported to a local regional medical hospital and strictly treated. When heavily armed police deputies eventually navigated back to retrieve the abandoned campsite, they discovered sheer chaos. The heavy, durable canvas tents were completely melted into toxic puddles and all metal hand tools twisted. Mark was tragically never seen again, despite the massive, coordinated regional search effort spanning 3 adjacent parishes. Highly trained search dogs completely lost his distinct individual scent trail near the edge of a deep bog. Law enforcement officials strongly suspected the blindly fleeing botanist accidentally fell into the massive, dark, deep sinkhole. However, they could not realistically explain how the heavy camping equipment was melted by extreme temperatures. The overwhelming putrid atmospheric sulfur smell and the localized underground ground vibrations also remained totally unsolved. Lisa permanently abandoned her promising wildlife photography career and moved to a bustling, noisy urban city. She absolutely refused to conduct any further public media interviews regarding her terrifying, unexplainable swamp experiences. She eventually quietly wrote a highly obscure anonymous internet blog detailing her intense, lingering psychological mental trauma. Reportedly, she deeply suffered from severe chronic daily insomnia and constant terrifying nightmares featuring tall, faceless entities. Dispatch logs routinely show she frequently called local urban police authorities complaining about strange, heavy mechanical vibrations. The deep, dark Louisiana swamps remain mostly completely uncharted and thoroughly feared by many veteran guides. Experienced local boat tour operators aggressively discourage overly ambitious amateur novice tourists from exploring that bayou. Official public records conflict regarding the actual total accurate number of missing persons cases linked to wilderness. Some ambitious, independent amateur internet investigators occasionally dangerously venture into the region, hoping to finally capture evidence. Most of them always return completely empty-handed, while a few others emerge with deeply unsettling stories. The absolute total lack of any definitive, hard physical evidence continually frustrates those who believe Lisa. The destroyed, shattered thermal camera conveniently completely erased any potential digital visual proof of the giant signature. Vociferous internet skeptics constantly loudly argue that sheer blind panic and total darkness easily transformed a bear. Archive notes carefully gathered from the official police investigation confidently concluded that an undocumented toxic gas leaked. Yet, the exact, specific, true origin nature of those massive, perfectly smooth footprints remains a contested topic. University biology experts easily dismiss the crazy, ridiculous idea of a completely unknown, massive swamp animal. They constantly argue that an active, healthy breeding population of large, hidden creatures would leave evidence. No unusual animal hair samples or strange skeletal bone remains have ever been definitively, positively, conclusively linked. Some locals claimed the federal national government quietly, aggressively suppressed the actual truth to secretly protect operations. Official government investigators never confirmed any grand illegal conspiracy and simply permanently closed the bizarre swamp case. The unmarked road, hidden deep in Appalachia. Deep in the heavily forested Appalachian mountains of West Virginia, a lost driver experienced a completely unexplainable, terrifying event. During the bitter winter of 2020, a dedicated commercial trucker encountered something that defies basic, logical, scientific explanation. What local authorities eventually uncovered completely destroyed the quiet, peaceful illusion of that specific, dark, rural mountain community forever. Archived notes from the massive official investigation describe a highly disturbing timeline of events that still haunts state police today. 42-year-old Arthur Pendleton worked as a dedicated commercial transport driver, simply trying to finish his route. His isolated route forced him through a highly outdated rural mountainous region located miles away from any major modern interstates. His primary daily objective required him to safely deliver heavy industrial equipment completely alone during the long, dark winter nights. The county file from 2009 actually mentioned several highly unusual missing traveler cases originating from that exact region. Arthur arrived on November 12th and immediately began carefully navigating the icy, narrow roads while listening to the quiet radio. The first quiet, freezing hours passed entirely without any significant dangerous incidents, as the exhausted driver cautiously navigated sharp turns. State records confirm that severe, scattered winter storms unexpectedly bypassed their specific elevation despite highly ominous regional weather forecast predictions. However, Arthur stopped his massive truck shortly after midnight because he clearly saw a massive fallen tree blocking the highway. He initially assumed a severe winter windstorm had aggressively knocked the massive dead pine completely across the designated rural road. When he cautiously looked directly at his digital navigation map, he noticed a highly obscure, unmarked dirt bypass road nearby. Arthur aggressively turned his heavy commercial vehicle onto the unpaved path, hoping to safely bypass the massive, solid wooden obstruction. The highly stressful situation escalated drastically during that dark hour when an awful chemical smell suddenly arrived continuously inside there. Reportedly, the foul, suffocating odor tightly resembled burning synthetic plastic, mixed heavily with the sharp scent of raw industrial sulfur. The isolated, terrified driver immediately started coughing violently and aggressively struggling to breathe properly inside the completely sealed truck cabin. Arthur quickly grabbed his portable emergency radio to call for immediate outside medical assistance, but only received loud, aggressive static. Dispatch logs show no emergency distress calls were ever successfully officially recorded by the regional sheriff department during that night. Suddenly, a massive, unseen, heavy physical force violently shook the solid dirt foundation and violently rattled the thick truck windows. Arthur scrambled frantically behind the heavy wooden steering wheel and desperately aimed his high-powered security flashlight toward the trees. The glowing beam instantly revealed an enormous, intense, dark mass standing perfectly still directly behind the parked commercial delivery truck. The strange dark anomaly lacked any discernible biological features and completely blocked the normal, bright ambient light from the moon. Records conflict regarding exactly how long he silently, terrifyingly watched the imposing tall anomaly before it slowly, finally, silently retreated. Arthur frantically, urgently insisted he absolutely needed to completely abandon the dangerous dirt road and aggressively reverse his heavy vehicle. He completely strongly pushed the heavy transmission lever, but he soon realized the main electrical engine panel was displaying sparks. He was effectively hopelessly trapped inside a massive, unforgiving wilderness region known for permanently disorienting, highly experienced commercial delivery drivers. The desperate, anxious driver decided to blindly, violently run toward the back, hoping to retrieve his heavy defensive metal tools. He confidently, blindly sprinted continuously through the freezing dark dirt road until he eventually physically discovered massive, strange, deep tracks. Arthur remained entirely, completely, silently hidden behind the thick, solid metal trailer while intensely listening for any sudden, aggressive movements. Archived notes from Arthur stated he repeatedly caught brief, terrifying glimpses of pale, smooth, large objects moving swiftly near trees. Every single time he abruptly, cautiously raised his head to firmly point out the hidden observer, the pale shapes vanished. Utter physical mental exhaustion eventually heavily forced him to quickly, carefully establish a completely vulnerable, unprotected defensive position down low. He huddled tightly, safely against the heavy metal tires while strongly clutching a heavy steel wrench for absolutely necessary protection. Around 2 in the freezing morning, the surrounding dark, dense woods suddenly fell, totally dead silent as freezing winds stopped. A deep, guttural, mechanical humming sound slowly, continuously began to violently vibrate through the damp dirt beneath the rubber tires. Some locals claimed strange underground natural gas releases occasionally plagued the Appalachian region, but geologists officially formally found zero evidence. Arthur frantically, aggressively scanned the pitch-black distant tree line with his heavy flashlight, but the expensive digital battery died. He silently screamed internally in absolute, sheer, unadulterated terror when a tall, pale, smooth shape casually stepped near the vehicle. The towering, featureless, pale entity did not overtly, aggressively attack the reinforced metal, but simply stood motionless, completely staring blankly. Arthur slowly, hesitantly gripped his heavy steel wrench tightly, but his frozen, numb fingers were constantly, heavily trembling, extremely violently. The bizarre, towering, unknown creature emitted another deep, deafening, humming vocalization that violently, instantly, completely shattered the thick truck windows. Plunged into total, suffocating, pitch-black darkness outside the truck, the terrified driver blindly, frantically crawled toward the deep brush. He hopelessly, blindly waited continuously inside the highly secure, hidden, thorny bush until the early morning sunlight eventually safely arrived. A commercial timber delivery operator miraculously happily found the rural vehicle completely abandoned near the heavily designated gravel access channel. The highly traumatized young driver was severely, badly dehydrated and suffering from multiple minor bleeding lacerations caused by broken glass. State records confirm he was quickly, safely, immediately transported to a local regional medical hospital and strictly treated for shock. When heavily armed local police deputies eventually carefully, safely navigated back to retrieve the abandoned truck, they discovered sheer chaos. The heavy, durable steel vehicle doors were entirely melted into toxic puddles, and all metal engine components were twisted. Arthur was tragically completely unable to mentally process his terrifying experience, despite the massive, highly coordinated regional psychological support presence. Highly trained tracking search dogs entirely lost any distinct individual scent trails near the steep edge of the woods. Law enforcement officials firmly suspected the quickly fleeing driver accidentally entirely hallucinated the terrifying, massive, deep, dark entity. However, they absolutely could not logically, realistically explain how the heavy steel doors were completely melted by extreme high temperatures. The overwhelming, putrid atmospheric sulfur smell and the highly localized underground ground vibrations also strictly remained totally, officially unsolved. Arthur permanently, fully abandoned his promising commercial transport delivery plans and rapidly moved to a bustling, noisy, populated city. He completely, absolutely, strictly refused to conduct any further public media interviews regarding his terrifying, unexplainable, deep dark road experiences. He eventually, quietly, safely wrote a highly obscure, completely anonymous internet blog detailing his intense, lingering, severe, heavy psychological trauma. Reportedly, he deeply, severely suffered from chronic daily heavy insomnia and constant terrifying nightmares featuring tall, faceless, smooth, looming entities. Dispatch logs regularly show he frequently frantically called local urban police authorities, continually complaining about strange, heavy mechanical vibrations. The deep, dark, isolated, unmarked mountain road remains mostly completely thoroughly abandoned and deeply heavily feared by many local residents. Experienced local rural highway patrolmen actively, aggressively, strictly discourage overly ambitious amateur novice drivers from widely exploring that specific acreage. Official public state records conflict regarding the actual, total, highly accurate number of missing traveler cases strictly linked to wilderness. Some ambitious, independent amateur internet investigators occasionally dangerously completely venture into the dark, unmarked road, hoping to finally capture evidence. Most of them always safely return completely empty-handed, while a few others quickly emerge with deeply unsettling, disturbing stories. The absolute, total, complete lack of any definitive, hard physical evidence heavily, continually, profoundly frustrates those who genuinely believe Arthur. The completely destroyed internal security cameras conveniently, completely, permanently erased any potential digital visual proof of the giant outside entity. Vociferous internet online skeptics constantly, loudly, aggressively argue that sheer blind panic and total utter darkness easily successfully transformed reality. Archive notes carefully, thoroughly gathered from the official local police investigation confidently, strictly concluded that an undocumented toxic gas leaked. Yet the exact, highly specific, true physical origin nature of those massive, perfectly smooth circular tracks remains completely officially contested. University biology science experts quickly, easily, permanently dismiss the crazy, ridiculous, bizarre idea of a completely unknown, massive humanoid animal. They firmly, constantly, strongly argue that an active, healthy, massive breeding population of large hidden creatures would leave physical evidence. No unusual animal organic hair samples or strange skeletal biological bone remains have ever been definitively, positively, completely, conclusively linked. Some locals claimed the federal, national, centralized government quietly, aggressively, permanently suppressed the actual truth to secretly protect classified operations. Investigators never confirmed any grand, illegal, hidden conspiracy and simply, safely, permanently, officially closed the bizarre, terrifying, unmarked road case. Arthur constantly refuses to leave his secure concrete urban apartment whenever the winter season finally slowly descends upon the city. He strictly, violently demands that every single heavy deadbolt lock remains securely fastened throughout the entire duration of the night. The actual, absolute, terrifying truth hiding deep within those ancient, desolate Appalachian mountains might never be completely, fully understood logically. Perhaps some dense, dark, forgotten regions of the deep American wilderness are genuinely meant to remain completely, entirely undiscovered forever. The Whispering Ridges of Blackwood Canyon. The eastern slopes of the mountain range remained largely unmapped during the late 19th century, attracting only the most resilient timber cruisers and surveyors. In the autumn of roughly 80 years ago, a team of 4 experienced land surveyors established a base camp in a deep, heavily forested valley known locally as Blackwood Canyon. Their objective was to plot the boundaries of a proposed timber reserve, a task requiring them to spend several weeks in total isolation from the nearest settlement. The environment was characterized by dense stands of old-growth Douglas fir, steep rocky terrain, and a silence so profound that the men initially remarked on the complete absence of typical forest sounds. By the fourth day of the expedition, the routine nature of their work began to shift, as a series of unexplained auditory sensations disrupted the camp. The men reported hearing what sounded like distant, rhythmic chanting that seemed to emanate directly from the stone walls of the canyon rather than from any distinct physical source. The lead surveyor, a veteran of wilderness campaigns named Thomas Albright, noted in his logs that the sounds did not align with any known wildlife or geological activity. The noises typically began just after sundown, starting as a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the ground before transitioning into distinct, modulated cadences resembling human speech. When the crew attempted to trace the sound, they found that its apparent direction shifted constantly, making it impossible to pinpoint an origin point. The younger members of the crew, including a transit operator named Edward Lynn, expressed growing discomfort, describing a sensation of intense pressure in their ears whenever the chanting commenced. Despite their unease, the team maintained their daily schedule, attributing the phenomenon to unusual wind currents passing through the narrow rock formations higher up the ridge. However, the lack of any significant wind during those chilly, still autumn nights quickly complicated that rationalization. As the first week drew to a close, the auditory disturbances escalated from distant hums to loud, distinct vocalizations that appeared to occur much closer to the perimeter of their camp. On the night of October 12th, all four men awoke simultaneously to the sound of a single, sustained note that seemed to vibrate the very canvas of their tents. Albright exited his tent with a lantern, but found nothing in the surrounding woods, except for a peculiar, localized mist that hung low to the ground despite a clear sky overhead. The camp dog, a large retriever known for its reliable tracking instincts, refused to leave the shelter of the supply wagon and spent the remaining hours of the night whimpering. The next morning, the crew discovered that their brass surveying instruments, which had been securely locked in wooden cases, were completely out of alignment, their delicate internal needles pointing wildly away from magnetic north. The psychological toll of the continuous, unexplained noise began to manifest in the behavior of the crew members, who reported experiencing vivid, recurring dreams of vast subterranean spaces. Lynn, in particular, became increasingly obsessed with the idea that the sounds were a form of communication, spending his evening hours sitting at the edge of the firelight, listening intently to the darkness. His journals from that week contained frantic attempts to transcribe the phonetic patterns of the chanting, resulting in pages of repetitive, nonsensical symbols that bore no resemblance to any known language. The other men attempted to dissuade him from his isolation, but a growing sense of irritability and mutual suspicion began to fracture the group dynamic. The shared perception of an unseen, listening presence in the valley created an atmosphere of pervasive dread that made sleep nearly impossible. By mid-October, the weather turned sharply colder, bringing heavy frost but no wind to explain the persistent acoustic phenomena. The team decided to accelerate their fieldwork in order to leave the canyon ahead of schedule, working longer hours in the rugged upper terrain. During these daytime excursions, the men began to experience sensory distortions, reporting that the forest appeared strangely flat and devoid of color, as if a thick veil had been drawn over the landscape. They also noted that their perception of time seemed heavily altered, with hours passing in what felt like mere moments, or conversely, a single afternoon stretching out into an agonizingly long ordeal. On several occasions, members of the party became momentarily separated in wide-open clearings, only to find themselves completely disoriented and unable to locate their companions who were standing less than 50 yards away. The peak incident occurred on the night of October 20th, during a period of total atmospheric stillness. The The chanting, which had been absent during the day, returned with an unprecedented intensity that made conversation within the camp impossible without shouting. According to later accounts collected from the survivors, the sound did not seem to travel through the air, but rather originated from within their own skulls, creating an intense throbbing sensation behind their eyes. At approximately midnight, Lin abruptly stood up from his bed, walked past his companions without speaking, and strode directly into the unlit forest toward the steepest section of the canyon wall. Albright and the remaining crew grabbed lanterns and pursued him immediately, but the dense undergrowth and the overwhelming nature of the sound severely hindered their progress through the dark. They followed the sound of Lin crashing through the brush until they reached the base of a massive, sheer cliff face where the acoustic vibrations were so intense that the lantern glass began to shatter. Through the dim, flickering light of the remaining lanterns, the men observed Lin standing motionless against the rock, his head tilted back as if looking toward the summit. When Albright approached to pull him away, Lin turned around, exhibiting a state of profound shock, his eyes wide and completely unblinking. He insisted that the wall of rock was no longer solid, but rather a vast opening leading into a brightly lit space filled with moving figures. The other crew members saw only the solid gray expanse of limestone, but the discrepancy in their perceptions caused an immediate, panicked retreat back to the main camp. The following morning, the team abandoned the majority of their heavy equipment and began a rapid descent out of Blackwood Canyon, determined to reach the nearest logging outpost. Lin remained in a catatonic state during the entire trek, requiring physical assistance to walk and showing no awareness of his surroundings. The remaining 3 men were plagued by a persistent ringing in their ears and a deep physical exhaustion that did not subside even after they exited the valley. Upon reaching safety, the surveyors underwent medical evaluations where doctors noted that all 4 men exhibited symptoms typically associated with extreme prolonged exposure to low-frequency vibrations, including inner ear damage and severe cognitive disorientation. An official investigation into the incident was launched by the Regional Surveying Office, primarily to recover the expensive abandoned equipment and to verify the claims made by the crew. A secondary team of surveyors, accompanied by 2 local law enforcement officers, entered Blackwood Canyon 3 weeks after the original party had fled. They located the base camp intact, though they noted that the surrounding vegetation showed unusual signs of localized desiccation, with leaves and pine needles scorched as if subjected to intense heat, despite no evidence of an actual fire. The brass instruments were recovered from their boxes, but examiners later determined that their metal components had become permanently demagnetized, rendering them completely useless for future geographic work. The second expedition experienced none of the acoustic phenomena reported by Albright's crew, finding the valley to be entirely quiet and unremarkable. They concluded that the original team had likely suffered from a form of collective hysteria brought on by the extreme isolation, poor rations, and the deceptive echoes common to narrow, rocky canyons. This environmental explanation, however, failed to satisfy the men who had lived through the experience, particularly given the permanent physical changes they suffered. Lin never fully recovered his faculties and spent the remainder of his life in a private sanitarium, where he continued to insist until his death that a part of his mind had remained behind inside the stone walls of the ridge. The case of Blackwood Canyon was eventually archived in regional historical records as a curious footnote in the mapping of the territory, largely forgotten by the public. Modern researchers who have examined the surviving logs and medical reports suggest that the valley may possess unique geological features capable of producing infrasound, which can cause hallucinations, anxiety, and physiological distress in humans. Others point to the possibility of localized pocket emissions of natural gases that could distort perception and cause collective neurological symptoms. To this day, the exact nature of what the surveyors encountered in that isolated valley remains unresolved. leaving behind only the eerie, unsettling testimonies of the men who heard the ridges whisper. The lingering questions surrounding the event continued to discourage further development in Blackwood Canyon for decades after the survey team's disastrous expedition. Local logging companies found that workers were highly reluctant to enter the valley, citing the old stories of the chanting and the psychological breakdown of the surveyors. Even when high-quality timber became scarce in adjacent areas, the canyon remained untouched, preserved by a reputation that time did not seem to dim. The few independent trappers who ventured near the perimeter of the valley in the early 20th century reported that the local wildlife appeared to avoid the deep interior of the canyon, preferring the more open, less oppressive terrain of the outer slopes. In the late 1950s, a university geology department attempted to conduct a comprehensive acoustic survey of the region to either confirm or disprove the infrasound hypothesis permanently. The researchers set up highly sensitive recording devices at various elevations along the canyon walls, hoping to capture any low-frequency vibrations generated by the unique rock formations. During their 2-week stay, the instruments recorded several instances of unusual seismic microtremors, but no significant acoustic anomalies were detected that matched the descriptions in Albright's journals. The study concluded that while the canyon's shape could theoretically amplify certain sounds, there was no contemporary evidence of any ongoing, unexplained phenomena active in the area. Despite the scientific community's skepticism, the private papers of Thomas Albright, which were donated to a regional historical society by his descendants, offer a much more personal and unsettling view of the aftermath. In his later years, Albright became a recluse, refusing to travel anywhere near mountainous terrain and keeping his home illuminated at all times of the night. His personal diaries reveal that he remained convinced until his final days that the phenomenon they encountered was not a product of the wind or gas, but something inherent to the location itself. He wrote extensively about the difficulty of adjusting to normal life when the memory of that absolute vibrating silence continued to echo in his mind, undermining his confidence in the physical world. The story of the Blackwood Canyon incident survives today primarily within the specialized archives of regional folklore and historical geography societies, away from mainstream media attention. It serves as a stark reminder of the limits of early exploration and the profound psychological effects that the deep wilderness can inflict on those who attempt to measure it. The unresolved discrepancy between the physical evidence of damaged equipment and the subjective horror experienced by the surveyors ensures that the valley retains its enigmatic status. Whether the events were caused by an undiscovered natural mechanism or a temporary distortion of human perception, the canyon remains a place where the boundary between reality and the unexplained became terrifyingly thin for 4 forgotten men.